they're supposed to keep Babangida, share the meat throughout the Nigeria because now he keep Nigeria like this.
Very soon, Tinubu will soon come out and launch his own book after he has misruled the country, and he will apologize to Peter Obi that I regretted. They will be celebrating and be clapping hands. All the leaders of the country will come and celebrate him. He will say he regretted, but you have done it. You have succeeded in ruining the country. You have succeeded in destroying the country, and you are sorry. It's enough now. What he's saying is enough. Is it not true?
Okay, so the Nigerian former military president, Ibrahim Babangida, IBB, has for the first time in over 3 decades openly admitted that the June 12, 1993 presidential election was won by the late Chief MKO Abiola. He has also expressed deep regret over the annulment of that historic vote. In his newly launched autobiography, A Journey in Service, Babangida acknowledges that the June 12th election was undoubtedly credible, free, and fair, widely accepted as the freest in Nigeria's history. He describes that annulment as that accident of history, which he finds most regrettable, and affirmed that as the leader of the military administration, he said, "I accept full responsibility of all actions taken under my watch, and June 12th happened under my watch."
Credible, free and fair elections were held on June 12, 1993. However, the tragic irony of history remains that the administration that devised a near-perfect electoral system and conducted those near-perfect elections could not complete the process. That accident of history is most regrettable.
Even President Tinubu, who himself was also a pro-June 12th activist, even commended Babangida's unusual courage in finally setting the record straight that Abiola truly won the June 12th election. Babangida's memo also offers his own account of the annulment, revealing new details that both acknowledge guilt and attempt to explain his actions. He claims that on June 23, 1993, he had left the federal capital Abuja for Katsina to attend a funeral, when elements within his government announced the annulment without his explicit approval. According to Babangida, a terse, poorly worded statement was read by one of his aides, declaring the election void. Babangida, also stated that he was alarmed and horrified by this announcement, which went as far as to suspend the Electoral Commission and cut proceedings related to the vote. He recounts thinking that inside forces opposed to the election have outflanked me, he said, and later learning that those forces were led by General Sani Abacha, his own defense chief. In Babangida's narrative, annulment was only a component of a series of other options, and he had not authorized that immediate course. Despite this, he concedes and he ultimately bears responsibility. Writing from then on, the June 12th election took on a painful twist for which I regrettably take responsibility, Babangida said. In essence, he portrays himself as being outflanked by Abacha, yet he acknowledges that the buck stopped with him as head of state. He even delivered the official nationwide broadcast on June 24, 1993, confirming the annulment, a speech in which he alleged electoral irregularities, despite observers insisting that the poll was clean, fair, and credible.
True that the presidential election was generally seen to be free, fair, and peaceful. However, there was in fact a huge array of electoral malpractices virtually in all the states of the Federation.
Babangida stepped down shortly after August 1993 amidst the crisis, handing power to an interim government that was quickly toppled by Abacha. Abiola's family members welcomed the acknowledgement. One of his sons called it healing to hear Babangida express remorse that finally validates the truth of Abiola's victory. Babangida also claimed that if given another chance, he would take a different path to making things right. Even so, many others are skeptical. Business commentators know that Babangida's memo appeared to deflect blame, painting himself as a well-intentioned leader thrust by others. In fact, Babangida had previously justified the annulment as his own decision, citing national security at that time, which sparkly conflicts with his new claims that Abacha acted behind his back.
There are a lot of people today in this country who supported what we did at the time we did.
What was the rationale behind the annulment?
You see, we discussed extensively about the security. We are worried about putting up a government that will not last long. And as a government,
what were the conditions that existed that raised those concerns?
There was the security problem.
As one columnist quipped, the general's attempt to recast himself as a victim rings hollow when we consider the lives lost, the democracy derailed, and the chaos that followed the annulment. Notably, Femi Falana, a prominent human rights attorney who was imprisoned in 1993 for protesting June 12th election, flatly rejects Babangida's self-exoneration. Falana points out that Babangida had meticulously planned the annulment in advance, signing no fewer than 5 degrees on June 22, 1993, the day before the announcement, to legalize the cancellation and bar any court challenges. Babangida even dissolved the electoral tribunal that was meant to adjudicate disputes, ensuring no legal recourse for Abiola. These documented actions undermined Babangida's claim of being surprised by the annulment, and Falana insists Babangida cannot deny his role. Other critics like Prof. Chidi Odinakalu argued that Babangida waited until key witnesses all died before spinning this narrative, noting he provides no concrete evidence or records in his book to support his version. Babangida's fresh admissions have prompted scrutiny over whether his action in 1993 violated Nigerian law or human rights, raising the questions of accountability after all these years. By annulling a democratic election and denying the winner their magnets, Babangida essentially carried out what activists term a civilian coup d'etat against the Nigerian people. The election has been organized under a legal transition framework, and its abrupt cancellation robbed Abiola of a victory and Nigeria of a historic democratic movement, plunging the country into years of political turmoil, civil unrest, and loss of lives. Human rights observers also note that the annulment and its aftermath, including mass protests, deadly crackdowns, and the jailings of pro-democracy activists, inflicted grave harms on Nigerians' rights. Senior lawyer and civil society groups are now openly debating whether Babangida's own statement amounts to a confession of legal acts and if he can be held liable under the law. To ascertain, under Nigerian's law, Babangida's annulment was extra legal, since it nullified an election that was conducted by statute, while ruling by decree at the time gave the junta sweeping powers. The deliberate subversion of the electoral process is viewed by many jurists as an unlawful abuse of power. In fact, to legitimize the annulment, Babangida had to issue special decrees ousting the jurisdictions of courts and voiding the election's results, a clear indication that the move had no standing in existing law and had to be backed by brute force of decree. Some legal experts liken the annulment to an act of treason and sedition against the sovereign will of the people, since a valid electoral mandate was discarded. Notably, Babangida himself now admits that Nigerians' democratic march was interrupted on June 12th, for which he expressed deep regret. By acknowledging that he sets the clock back on democracy, he implicitly concedes a breach of the public trust and constitutional order, which in many jurisdictions could be considered a high crime. Beyond the annulment itself, Babangida's regime has long been accused of serious human rights abuses, some of which were exacerbated by the June 12th crisis. After election was cancelled, the regime cracked down on dissent, pro-democracy groups organized nationwide to protest, to which Babangida responded with mass arrest of activists and journalists. Femi Falana, Gani, Beko, Kuti, and other campaigners were detained simply for publishing election results or protesting the injustice. Falana recalls that they were charged with sedition, denied bail, and imprisoned under Babangida's Dracon Decree No. 2, which allowed indefinite detention without trial. These actions violated fundamental rights to free expression, assembly, and due process. Falana also notes that Babangida's knew their persecution was baseless. He deliberately arrested, detained, and paraded me as a criminal, only to say now we regret what we did. With Babangida's new admission that the election was legitimate, it is clear that the jailing of those activists who challenged the annulment was malicious and unlawful, amounting to an abuse of their human rights. Furthermore, Babangida's 8-year rule from 1985 to 1993 featured other notorious incidents, extrajudicial killings, press suppression, and alleged assassination of regime critics. A prominent example was the 1986 later bombed assassination of journalist Dele Giwa, which occurred under Babangida's watch. A national human rights inquiry and Aputa panel later found prima facie evidence implicating Babangida's regime in Dele's murder and recommended a full criminal investigation. The same panel identified numerous extrajudicial killings and state abuses during Babangida's tenure and held him personally responsible for those violations. Babangida, however, refused to cooperate with the Puta Commission and obtained a court order blocking the enforcement of its findings. Other human rights abuses linked to his ruling include the execution of an alleged court plotter, General Maman Fasta, in 1986 under questionable circumstances, and deadly forces used against student protesters and ethnic riots in the late 80s. Activists argued that some of these actions, if proven in court, could qualify as criminal offenses, murder, conspiracy, unlawful detention under Nigerian courts of law, and possibly as crime against humanity under international law due to their systematic nature. The Committee for the Defense of Human Rights in Nigeria has explicitly called Babangida's annulment an affront to democracy and justice, and asserts that by causing widespread unrest, killings, and suffering, he committed crimes against humanity for which he should be held to account. The group urged President Tinubu to order Babangida's prosecution for orchestrating a coup d'etat that subverted the democratic will of Nigerians, emphasizing that chief plotter has confessed to these crimes in public and in writing. This reflects a growing sentiment among human rights organizations that Babangida's own admissions have removed any ambiguity and provided basics for legal action. And now to ask, legally, can Babangida be prosecuted now? The question is complex. Under Nigerian law, there is no statute of limitations for serious crime like murder or treason. In principle, Babangida could be investigated and tried for specific criminal acts. For example, the trial into Dele Giwa's assassination or the unlawful detention of activists, if new evidence or political will emerges. Falana has already announced he is assembling a legal team to challenge his 1993 detention in court, aiming to prove that Babangida violated his fundamental human rights. This should be a civil action for the redressed, but it could open the door for broader accountability. However, bringing Babangida to criminal trial within Nigeria faces significant hurdles. Historically, Nigeria has never prosecuted any former head of state for human rights abuses due to a mix of political reluctance, allied solidarities, and also the fact that many of Babangida's contemporaries remain in power. To also record, Babangida himself secured court protections in the past to avoid accountability. Unless the government actively supports a prosecution, it is unlikely that the police or attorney general would pursue charges decades after that fact. Under international law, there is a precedent for holding former detectives accountable for human rights crimes, but it usually involved and requires extraordinary steps. Notably, crime against humanity have no statute of limitation and can be tried in international tribunals or foreign courts under universal jurisdiction. If the post-June 12 crackdown or other incidents are characterized as part of systematic policies of repression, Babangida could, in theory, face charges of crimes against humanity. However, the International Criminal Court (ICC) would not have jurisdiction in this case. Nigeria ratified the ICC statute after 1993, and the court cannot apply retroactivity. Another path could be an High Tribunal or a special court, similar to what was used for Chaldean ex-dictator. No international warrant exists against Babangida, and Nigerian authorities have shown more interest in reconciliation than prosecution. In fact, submissive governments have symbolically rehabilitated June 12th, for example, officially recognizing Abiola as a past president and making June 12th Democracy Day, rather than pursue punishment. President Tinubu's warm praise of Babangida's patriotism in admitting the truth rather than any admonition signals that Nigerians' leadership is not inclined to litigate the past. Still, human rights lawyers like Falana and groups like CDHR continue to press for at least symbolic justice, arguing that accountability, even if delayed, is essential. They assert that Babangida's action violated both Nigerian statutes and international human rights norms, providing legal grounds for prosecution. At minimum, Babangida's public confession has ignited debate about the rule of law and whether Nigerians should pursue legal redress or let the wounds heal. Babangida also revisited the January 1966 coup, a pivotal and contentious event in Nigeria's history. The June 15, 1966 military coup has often been portrayed, especially in northern Nigeria, as an Igbo coup, because the young officers who led it were predominantly of Igbo ethnicity, and they assassinated several northerners and western political leaders. Babangida, who was a junior officer in 1966, flatly dismisses the notion that it was an ethnically Igbo plot. According to asserts of his books, he emphasizes that the coup leader, though Igbo by origin, spoke Hausa fluently and was more North than Igbo. Babangida described the coup as a pan-Nigeria revolutionary movement for regime change, not an ethnic takeover. He reveals that the coupist aimed was to install Chief Obafemi Awolowo as provisional prime minister rather than to entrench Igbo power. This aligns with some historians' accounts that the plotters intended to release Awolowo from prison and make him leader, contradicting the Igbo theory. These statements clarify and correct the historical record from Babangida's perspective. They collaborate the idea that the January 1966 putsch was driven by frustration with corruption and a desire for political change across regional lines. This is a significant rebuttal to the narrative propagated after the counter coup of July 1966, which painted the January coup as driven by ethnic bias. The reaction to Babangida's 1966 coup revelation has been notable, especially among Igbos communities. Ndi Igbo, the Apex Igbo social-cultural organization, welcomed his account as an overdue vindication. Chooks, a former Onaize spokesperson, said he was happy Babangida finally told the truth to the world on January coup, calling it a pan-Nigeria coup that was wrongly characterized as an Igbo plot. He also noted that the Ndi Igbo lost 3 million lives in the civil war that followed, partly due to wrong profiling of the coup's intent. With Babangida, a respected northern figure, now affirming that Awolowo was the intended leader, there are calls for Nigerian state to apologize to Igbo nation for the atrocities of 1966 to 1970. Since the justification used for them is now discredited, some Igbo's leader even suggested the federal government should offer compensation or restitution for the enormous losses suffered given this corrected narrative. Babangida's coup comment also implicitly challenged some established accounts by other actors. For instance, General Yakubu Gowon and General T.Y. Danjuma, key figures in quelling the 1966 coup and leading the counter-coup, long held the view that the January 15 mutiny was primarily an Igbo plot. Babangida's version urges such figures to follow suit and tell their own truth, potentially to foster reconciliation. And it's worth noting that Babangida himself was nearly killed fighting on the federal side during the later civil war, which lent weight to his words and now being seen as an objective in repudiating the Igbo coup label. In summary, Babangida's recollection of 1966 clarify previous misconceptions. They contradict the tribal narrative of the coup and thereby invite Nigerians to revisit the causes of the civil war with a more clear lens. This has been praised as a positive, truth-telling contribution of his memo, even by those who criticize other parts of his record. Babangida's book and interview have not only reopened historical debate, they have also led to renewed examination of his personal accountability for past mistakes. While the memo itself is largely seen as Babangida's version of history, it did not provide any documentary evidence of events, a fact critics alike. However, in his own admission, serve as an important evidence in themselves. For example, by conceding that he nullified the democratic election that he knew was fair. Babangida essentially admits to undermining the fundamental human right of the people to choose their government. This admission is something activists can point to in seeking justice. Cause for prosecution, as noted, organizations like CDHR argue that Babangida's public confession strengthened the case for persecuting him. They view the annulment and attendant abuses as crime against humanity, citing how the episode led to nationwide violence and the death of many Nigerians. They believe Babangida could be charged domestically for treason or for gross abuse of human rights, and they urge the government to act. Thus far, there is no indication of the state moving to prosecute, but civil suits are in works. For instance, Femi Falana's legal action to declare his 1993 detention illegal and secret. Falana emphasizes that Babangida's admission proves the regime had no legitimate ground to jail activists, strengthening the case that their rights were violated. Opinions vary on forgiveness versus justice. There is a divide in expert opinion whether to let bygones be bygones or pursue accountability. Mike, senior advocate of Nigeria, advocates accepting Babangida's remorse and moving on. Babangida's revelation themselves had new pieces of testimony, but he did not declassify any official records about June 12th or other controversies. In fact, he has been criticized for not producing contemporaneous records, minutes, or notes to support his claim about the annulment decision-making. Thus, much of the documentary evidence of wrongdoing comes from existing record. One such record is the Aputa Panel Report 2002, which, although never officially released by the government, was leaked by civil society. That report implicates Babangida in serious wrongdoings, notably recommending investigation of his role in Dele Giwer's assassination. It also held him liable for other human rights violations and advised barring him from any future leadership position. Another report, the Pius Akibo Commission 1994, examined the Nigerians' oil revenues and accused the Babangida's regime of mismanaging or siphoning billions of dollars. Though Babangida has never been prosecuted for those economic crimes either, while the Akibo report deals with corruption rather than human rights, it adds to the documented record of Babangida's misrule. These reports, combined with the Babangida's own acknowledgement in 2025, paints a picture of a regime that knowingly violated laws and rights. For example, Babangida now admits his government shut down court proceedings and suspended the rules to terminate the June 12th, which align with what critics have long said, that his junta willfully broke its own transition laws to cling to power. Importantly, no fresh criminal evidence has emerged directly from the memo beyond Babangida's commentary. There have been, however, some new personal accounts and reflection triggered by the book's release. For instance, Major Abubakar Umar, a former ally to Babangida who opposed the annulment, gave interview recalling how he had warned Babangida against cancelling the result, providing further insider perspective on Babangida's responsibility. Overall, the consensus of most experts in that Babangida's newfound truth-telling doesn't absolve him of culpability. Instead, it affirms and confirms that he was at the center of major violations, subversions of democracy, and suppression of rights, for which, in an ideal scenario, he could be held accountable. Whether Nigeria will truly pursue any form of legal accountability remains doubtful, but the statements have re-energized discussions about justice of June 12th and the dark chapter of military rule.